Well, Quentin, 33 years ago, being a bit of a fan of old movie magazines, I decided to start my own. And I started this one in Australia, and it was called Movie 73, and it changed its title every year. I ran it for 7 years while I was making my own movies and other people's trailers. And I think probably there are 2 extant copies of the very first edition around, and I would like you to have one of them.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah. It has a nice picture of a man with a bloody face on the front.
Yes, right here at the...
So I felt that this would particularly appeal to you.
No, it does appeal to me quite a bit,
William
actually.
Atherton from Slaughterhouse-Five.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And people said to me, why are you going to put blood on the front cover? No one's going to buy that. And I said, watch them.
It was Dead End Driving was the first time that I made a note to like, oh, who is this director? All right, this guy's great. All right, and then I realized, oh my God, that's the guy who did Escape 2000, known as Turkey Shoot in Australia. All right, and so it was like, and oh, that's the guy that did The Dragonflies. That's the guy who did The Man from Hong Kong. And then I just started like going back and and checking out all your flicks. One of the things I haven't seen The Quest yet, but I've had it for a while, so I'm looking forward to seeing that. But the thing about it though is, it was Dead End Driving that made me like, wow, that's fantastic. Who directed this? And then only to realize that you'd done movies I'd liked before.
I think one of the errors in judgment that I made as a sort of neophyte filmmaker was to believe that anyone can do stunts. And I did stunts, and I've been set on fire 7 times. And one of those occasions was to show George how you could be very safely set on fire. And so, how could he say no after that? And the Chinese crew were just looking at me in astonishment. Directors don't normally set themselves on fire unless they are stars of the film, like Wong Yu. And so we set him up for the fire stunt, and unfortunately he did burn a portion of his hand. So I regret that, and I shouldn't have done that. But this was kind of frontier filmmaking in Australia. We were all a bit sort of learning as we went. But it was very brave of George to do what he did, and he was good about it, when he got burned.
Well, John Woo, in his very first movie in America, Hard Target, did the same thing with Lance Henriksen. There's this magnificent sequence where they set Lance Henriksen on fire, and he actually is like, his coat is like completely on fire, and he's taking it off as he's delivering his lines and everything. And the fact that knowing that it's really happening, all right, you can't buy that thrill. You just can't buy it.
That's
You can't create it. There's no special effect. That when they actually do it. No, well, you did a film that I love. It's actually one of my favorite Vietnam movies of all time. Is the Siege of Firebase Gloria, which is just wonderful. I even talked about it, I think, in Entertainment Weekly.
You did. Thank you very much for that.
And it was actually kind of funny because it was one of those things where it's like, I got a print of it like years ago and watched it and really liked it. I hadn't seen it in a long time, and then started diving back into Australian cinema again. And wanted to screen it, and I watched it with Jasmine, our mutual friend now. Yeah.
Though I've never met Jasmine. We have a phone and email relationship.
You guys are phone boyfriend girlfriend.
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
And so we watched it, and it was just terrific. And so then, like literally about like 2 weeks later, I do the interview with Entertainment Weekly, and they go, "So, is there any films you want to talk about that maybe we've never heard of that maybe we should?" And it was like 2 weeks ago I'd seen it, and it was very fresh in my mind, and I wanted to see as a matter of fact I do.
Right? Well, thank you, Quentin. That was very good.
But it was great though, because actually it was the second time I'd seen it. All right, and it had been a long time had been in between, and it completely and utterly held up and delivered. And in fact, I even liked it better the second time. Well, one thing that's really also also special about Siege of Firebase Gloria is, okay, when you look at war films, there's war films, there's Vietnam films, all right, but if you look at a war film, there's all these, just like in horror films, there's subgenres inside of subgenres inside of subgenres, all right? There's a bunch of guys on a mission movie, there's this, there's that, and the other. Your film is like the battle movie. It's like the Battle of the Bulge or Waterloo or something like that. It's a battle movie, all right? And it's actually, and you guys didn't have that much time and you didn't have that much money and everything, but you make a hell of an impressive, magnificent battle film, all right? And I actually think probably the only one of its type for dealing with Vietnam.
Yeah. Every production that I worked on would always try and cooperate with other productions in sharing actors and sometimes sharing equipment. It was kind of, we felt God, we're so lucky to be making a movie.
Yeah.
And isn't it great? Australia's got a film industry after not having one for so many years, because it had a self-supporting film industry in the 20s and 30s. It could recover the budgets of films, but then the foreign-owned distributors bought up the theatre circuits.
And that was
and then say, we'll make them, you'll show them.
Well, you know, it was funny because, let me bring up a film, I don't know if you've ever heard it or seen it or not, but, you know, in my looking through Australian cinema and trying to find this one and that one and everything, I came across a 16mm print of a film that is just fantastic. Me and Jasmine watched it. And it was like from the early 60s. It's called Four Desperate Men. And it stars Aldo Ray.
Oh, it's The Siege of Pinchgut.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. That's it. Okay, in America it was called the Four Desperate Men. And we watched it, and it is a fantastic action film, fantastic like heist thriller action film. Aldo Ray, who I've always loved anyway, is great in the movie. Everyone else are these terrific Aussie actors. I mean, some of the best location footage of Sydney ever.
Sydney Harbour is great. I mean, there's this little island in the middle, Pinchgut Island, and you know, that was a perfect place. 360 degrees of fantastic vistas. You can't go wrong. It's a pity it wasn't in colour, but it still worked great in black and white.
Oh yeah, and it was like, you know, I was like, oh my God, this is really an Australian film.
And I tried to remake it as The Siege of Sydney, where they had a nuclear device on the island. You know, I tell you, my sons are absolute, you know, they are slavish fans of Kill Bill.
Oh, excellent.
And Kill Bill 2. And I've now been watching it again as one whole movie. Are you planning to re-release it on DVD and narrate it as a whole movie?
Yeah, the thing, we actually screened for the first time ever when I was in Cannes. This last year I was on the jury. And we screened, they hadn't, Kill Bill 2 hadn't been shown in France yet, so we had a big Palais screening. But the last night of the festival, we put Kill Bill together as one movie, and we arranged it for that. So it was like it plays as one whole movie, and there's some scenes that are not in it, all right, that are in there's some scenes in it that are not in Volume 1 and Volume 2, and there's some scenes in Volume 1 and Volume 2 that are not in that, all right, to make it just play as one big movie. It has an intermission right in the middle of it, you know, intermission music, all right, the whole thing. And yeah, we'll be eventually, and that's also the Japanese version, which has stuff that was never shown in only shown in Hong Kong and Japan, that I made especially for them because they can handle it. And other people can't. And so so it's that version, all right, all together as one movie. So we're waiting kind of for everything to die down, and once Miramax disentangles themselves from Disney and have their new company, we're going to release Kill Bill, the full thing all together.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Well, I look forward to see the scenes that you know, we didn't see.
Yeah.
Would you still go to black and white?
Nope. Not in the Japanese version.
Okay.
Yeah, in the Japanese version, and we kept it in color. I could show that in Japan, and they will see it for what it is, the color red. All right. But already people talked about the blood in Kill Bill all the time. If I had not gone to, if I had kept it all in color, then that's all anyone would have talked about.
Yeah.
Is just, oh, it's so bloody, it's so bloody, it's so bloody. They still talked about that a lot anyway, but that really, you know, in Europe, and with the exception of Italy, in Europe and America, it's like, it's something they just can't, they wouldn't be able to see the movie for the blood. And then the cool part about it is I kind of get to have my cake and eat it too, because the black and white looks really cool, all right?
You see, the MPAA, bless their little hearts, they took exception to the exploding head in Turkey Shoot, Escape 2000, and they demanded it be cut out. So New World dutifully cut it out of a print, sent it back, and were passed. And then the rest of the country played uncut. And then someone informed on them, and they had to withdraw these prints and cut these bits out. So I wanted to have the last word, so I put the exploding head on the drive-in screen in Dead End Drive-In.
Oh, excellent! Yes.
And it goes through with an R in America, no problem. So finally,
well, it's like it's once removed. All
yes,
right?
exactly.
It's just once removed.
Yeah.
Well, now let me ask you a question, because you worked with that whole shady New World company after Roger Corman sold it and everything. What were your experience with those guys?
Oh, shady. I mean, you see, the thing about Roger Corman is that he was a filmmaker.
Yeah.
You know, he had a passion for celluloid, and there wasn't a job on the crew he couldn't do.
Right.
And so when he took on a film for distribution, he would invest some passion into it. I mean, I remember when one of the last things he took on, I think, was Shogun Assassin. Lone Wolf and Cub compressed.
They did a great version of it, too.
They did a great version.
That version stands up to this day.
And you know the ad line they wanted to use?
What?
Shogun Assassin, he'll kick your ass in. but no newspaper would print it.
Right.
So I don't know. Oh dear. But Corman, he loved film so much that he would not let you down.
Yeah.
He would get the best. He would squeeze as much out of it as possible. These guys were just number crunchers. They were lawyers.
We met, like 6 years ago, or very briefly at a little cocktail kind of party for just a couple seconds, actually.
It was when Mira Sorvino.
Exactly. Yeah, and you had just directed her dad in a film.
That's right, in Escape Clause.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And but we met each other in passing, kind of thing, and then but it was like we didn't really have a relationship when I at the Kill Bill premiere, all right, in Sydney, when I dedicated the screening to you, and it was just truly because of your work, all right.
Thank you.
I liked it, and I wanted to shine a light, all right, on and I thought Kill Bill was the perfect movie to do that with, all right, to Australia's own history of genre filmmaking, in which I consider you the leader, all right, of that. And so, what did you think about? How did you hear about it? All right.
Somebody called me and said this happened, and then sent me a Sydney Morning Herald article that in which a somewhat sort of snooty critic had sort of interviewed you and thought, but the name I was expecting to hear, Peter Weir, Julian Armstrong, but the name I heard was Brian Trenchard-Smith, who's probably had an all right average career somewhere, but you were a big fan, and it was.
I love.
It was written in mocking terms.
Yeah, but that was the funnest part about it, actually, after doing that and doing press and everything, and them asking. I love to shut those guys down. All right. Yeah. They would ask it, and I would shut them down.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I would, they would have to acquiesce. All right. At least as far as at least as far as my opinion was concerned, there'd be no changing of it, and then I would sit there and defend each point, all right, point by point by point.
That's very kind. But you love film. I mean, your celluloid runs in your veins.
Yeah, I think so.
And it's always good to meet a kindred spirit.
Yes, I agree.
Because I would pay to direct, but happily they're still paying me.
Yeah, right.
Peter Weir was the way people wanted film directors to be so sensitive, and he'd say, and I had a dream where the ghosts of the diggers came to me on Gallipoli Beach and said, don't make the film, don't make the film. But I felt I had to. People love all that. He was trained as a real estate agent, and he remained with those gifts. He would always sell a film better than it was. The worst thing you could do to Peter Weir, the worst thing you could do is have a Peter Weir retrospective festival. You would find they're all the same. They're uh-oh films about, my God, the weather is changing. My God, they're coming in the windows. Dreadful man, dreadful man. The reputation he initially made was wholly undeserved. I think there's one called The Plumber, in which a woman is menaced in a motel room by a plumber who keeps leaving. She doesn't leave. She waits for him to come back and menace her again. I mean, this is crazy stuff. There's a film called The Last Wave, in which an Aboriginal religion is discovered in the Bondi sewers slightly before a wave which we never actually see crash rears up over Australia. This is nonsense. This is absolute nonsense. There's a film called The Year of Living Dangerously, in which a man, seeing all of his fellow citizens lying dead on the road, joins in the laughter of the surviving Australian. Give me a break. It's a film in which a female dwarf plays a male dwarf. What is going on here? This is crazy stuff. He is not wholly well in his mind, and he really. And there's a film called Gallipoli, in which two men clearly in love with each other say, "Race you to the pyramids." I mean, there's no female content in any of his films, and he has a wife who's got many of the characteristics, but less of the intelligence than a cement mixer, and he's just not. He's not a deserving figure of praise. He's an intellect of the third rank and a salesman of the first rank.
Until Don Chipp became minister, the decisions of the Customs Department were known only. They were considered, like the Tax Department, private issues between the importer, the individual importer, and the censors. So it was almost impossible to ferret this stuff out. There were a few people like, say, David Stratton in his early days at the barricades, and then, of course, the late Don Chipp and the R certificate turned all that round. But the sad thing is that 30, 35 years later, when Silo is banned again, you have police going into art galleries, you have the same crap coming all over again. So nothing much changes, and we're a pathetic country to let it.
One of the most bizarre things was tour operators in Australia taking tours to New Zealand to see Ulysses. But even more bizarre is when they got there were two cinemas in each New Zealand capital city running it, women in one and men in the other. I mean, but that was one of the most ridiculous situations.
You know what would happen if you put them in the same theatre watching the movie.
And it was a pretty innocuous film, really. I mean, completely innocuous. But there we are.
But I heard stories about, replicas of the Statue of David being banned and people being arrested for carrying Playboy. So it was a pretty severe state.
Not only that, I mean, apparently in Sydney, I don't know this for a fact, but apparently quite a lot of the Catholic churches had to take down some of the statuary while the Pope was in town. So, like I said, not much has changed.
And also there was the factor of there was a national censorship, but then states could override national censorship. So you get situations where people could see a picture in New South Wales, but not in Queensland, particularly not in Queensland. They were entertaining. They came out of the theatre. I mean, these were people who actually had a relationship with an audience and knew what was entertaining. I mean, David Williamson wrote Stork originally because he's 10 feet tall for himself to play, and I think he did play it first. And then of course Bruce did a brilliant job.
The success of Stork pushed Village Roadshow into investing with Tim and Bilcock and Copping and setting up Hexagon, which then produced Alvin. And in response to Mark's question, one of the reasons that Alvin was successful, apart from the fact that there was a lot of nudity in it, apart from the fact that it was an R-rated title, was that it was a virtually integrated production structure. There hadn't been one in Australia essentially since Cinesound. You had the production company, the distribution company, and the exhibition group all aligned in co-ownership, pushing the film as one.
Obviously, it was also about seeing Australians on screen after such an absence from the screen. And Richard, I know that you were in England when Bazza got released in Australia.
A couple of friends told me it had been very commercially successful. That was as much as I knew until I returned and found cars would pull up, people would cross the road to tell me how much they detested the film. Just as last night Quentin Tarantino was talking about how much he hates snobs, Bazza really was loathed by snobs. And I think that was part and parcel, of the enjoyment of it. I remember when we did the film saying to Bruce that the scene where Barry Humphries vomits on McCarthy's head was too much. Audiences would be revolted, forget about it. He said, they'll love it, they'll love it. I went to see the film when I got back, and as the scene approached, about 30 seconds before, I could hear people saying, here it comes, and then, ah! So.
There was a certain exclusivity about that kind of exhibition. Now, if an actor takes his clothes off, it's going to be on YouTube. It is with you forever. And so a lot of young actors think, do I really want my continuing career to be dogged by shots of me in an early, low-budget movie, taking off my clothes or engaging in, fairly graphic copulation. But back in the early 70s, it was we were breaking new ground, and we were making a statement that guilt about sex should be over, and we should be proud of our bodies, proud of our sexuality, and that lasted a few years, and then I think people maybe got a little jaded with the degree of nudity, and it was no longer the attractive forbidden fruit that it was at the beginning of the R rating.
I mean, Australia was a terribly, terribly conservative country from the end of World War II through until '66. I mean, at every level, in art, in politics, in music, and of course we didn't have a cinema. So a lot of things happened sort of simultaneously in the '60s. I mean, it was partly the change of government, it was partly the R certificate, it was partly money being thrown by Gorton and then the Whitlam government at the arts. It was partly just due to a general sense of anti-establishmentarianism that was abroad at the time, and I think it was a new generation working through. It was all of those things. These things come in cycles. I mean, it's not, if you look at the 17th or 18th century in France or Germany, you see great changes back and forth between radical thought and conservatism, and I think Australia and the United States has just swung back. I agree with what Brian says about the ubiquity of YouTube and what have you in terms of actors and what have you, but I think the kids coming up now are just more conservative, and it's a pity. I mean, I just didn't especially like the historical crap. I mean, Picnic at Hanging Rock to me is a boring movie. I thought it was appalling. Sunday Too Far Away, I couldn't understand anybody in it. So I don't like those films at all. I mean, I just think they're crap. And but the films I liked were thrillers. The films that I liked were in that thriller horror genre, so I just wanted to make some for myself. Now, it also happened that it was a great opportunity. We quickly discovered that material was far more exportable. I mean, yes, Barry Mackenzie played in England, of course, because of the success of the comic strip in South Africa, but it didn't, for all practical purposes, play very many other places. And a number of the other great Australian films of the time, The Devil's Playgrounds and all of those pictures had very, very limited release outside of film festivals and one or two art houses, and certainly in the States. They didn't play outside of San Fran, New York, Boston, Seattle, and Los Angeles. We wanted to go mainstream, and what could you do? You could do horror, you could do sex, you could do suspense, you do bikey stuff. I mean, all of that stuff exported, and it appealed to the people who go to the movies, kids, not geriatrics and professors. So that I made what I wanted to make, and it turned out to be exportable and profitable.
I also made what I wanted to make because I defined action as the universal currency of the movie market. It transcended all language barriers and appealed to the young. Irony is important to me, and I've always found the contradiction between the crypto-fascist superhero who causes an appalling amount of destruction in the name of justice, an interesting concept that sort of sails blithely by in all those American movies, and I thought it would be nice to have a kind of wry riff on that and have a Chinese Dirty Harry come to Australia and wreck the place, and also possibly explore certain ingrained attitudes of racism amongst the Australian characters, but basically cloak this in a sort of live-action Tom and Jerry. But that comes from me, and it's a film actually sort of that comes from my heart, which that tells you.
I should tell you that Brian's original title for The Man from Hong Kong was Yellow Peril.
Yes, for some reason, my Chinese partners took exception to that. I tried to explain the irony, but irony sometimes doesn't translate very well to other cultures. And I think still the film in Asia is seen as a straight action thriller with an Asian superstar in it, and its sly references are not grasped. I had hoped that it would be the first of a series of Australian co-productions with Asia, because Asia is our northern neighbour, and we've got to stop thinking of ourselves as I'm talking back in 75, 74 when I was putting it together, a European enclave in the middle of Asia. We have to become multicultural, I felt, and so I wanted to have an Asian hero make love to Australian girls. I wanted to throw that in the face of the Australian public in 1975 and see whether they could respond to it. It was interesting, of course, when the film was released in Asia, how some of my dialogue was changed. When Jimmy Wong Yu, the man who eats flies before love scenes, was making love to Rebecca Gilling, and she purrs, this is nice. His response was, what did you expect? Acupuncture? That was my sense of humor, but when they came to translate it into Cantonese, his reply was, what did you expect? Jackhammer?
It's so easy with stunts to actually make them quite safe. And your biggest risk ever is going to be going home from a stunt. I've had one broken bone in my life trying to get to Mad Max 1 to do a stunt. Bloody fuck hit me on the way out. I never got there. If I got to the stunt, I would have been safe. I mean, as a producer, they'll make damn sure that nobody is drunk, nobody is this, no cars are false. Everything's worked out for you. And you also know what each other's going to do. So it becomes actually quite safe.
I went in with an invoice to Bob Howard, who was the then accountant at the Australian Film Development, and he looked at it and said, we can't put this through. I said, Bob, you have to. It was dope for the use of Hell's Angels, stone. I mean, I had a big green garbage bag full of dope, and I had more, but there were also many, many slabs of beer, but that was the deal, and they turned up. Afterwards, I took them to the Dry Dock Hotel round the corner for some drinks afterwards, which was where that moment happened, where this guy kept on coming up to them and said, "You're so fucking weak, you're a fortnight." And I'm in the bar with them. And as I said in the film very briefly, I mean, I'd never seen anything happen so quickly, because they scalped him, and the blood was all over the ceiling, the walls, and the floor of the bar. And it happened, it went from, they were completely charming to ultra-violence in a nanosecond. I mean, it took less than a minute. But that was that great day at the Forth and Clyde, where Roger started the whole thing, and he comes out onto we're all assembled, and he comes out onto the veranda. All Hell's Angels are posters, and I'm standing in the middle of the Hell's Angels. I thought, that's it. It's all over. We're going to die. Thank you, Roger. But it was an amazing day, because the energy of them coming together. I mean, they came and supported us to make the film, because from their perspective, we were not demeaning their culture. We were certainly not approving of their culture. But we were giving, from their point of view, an honest appraisal. They actually, the Hells Angels, came out and read the screenplay before we actually made the film and gave it their stamp of approval. When Roger was actually then later on that day filming the scenes, I mean, they just loved him, because they looked into his eyes, because he's a great actor. He's a fantastic actor, one of the best actors I've ever worked with, because it's all about reaction and it's all in the eyes. And when they were actually in the scene fighting with Roger and looking into his eyes, they thought, no, he's one of us. He would kill us. And that's what they saw. Now, of course, he's the most gentle man in the world, but he is a great actor. That's the point.
Look, we've spent $2.5 billion. You might as well have burnt it. The last 35, you might as well take 2.5 or $2.7 million, put it on a big fucking pile on this table and set fire to it. Because that's about what has happened over the 35 years. 500, 600, 700 movies that all, with the exception of about 40, nobody has ever seen, nobody's ever heard of, nobody goes to. People go to Australian movies, they watch some piece of crap, they don't go for another year. Video stores don't want them because they're so awful they're taking up shelf space. It's a disaster. Yes, it's a disaster. Worse than a disaster. It's cataclysmic, apocalyptic and stupid.
That's by Tony's figure, that's 5 or 6%. Oh, one other reason I think there were so few genre movies until Stone, until Mad from Hong Kong, until Mad Max was the ones that came out were so bad. People with, you know, they're very, very hard to do. People with the expertise of Brian and George Miller, or even comparable expertise, don't grow on trees.
But not only were they not grow, do they not grow on trees, I agree with you, Richard, but there was poison being poured all over them by the cultural bodies for 20, 25 years. You put your hand up and said you wanted a horror picture.
The
Look,
school prefects.
terrible. I mean, awful. And frankly, until Brian Rosen took over at the FFC, and even for the first couple of years there, you went into the FFC with a genre movie, you wouldn't have got out of the elevator. Barely got out of the elevator before they'd set the Rottweilers on you. And I'm not talking about the assessors.
I mean, you can explore social issues in genre film. I mean, look at the Warner's oeuvre of the 1930s. There was a depression. Capitalism had fucked America. What were the working class going to do to stay alive? They were becoming thieves. Now, of course, at the end you could see Cagney dying on the steps of a church, but in the interim you saw him having a great time. But they were incredibly politically subversive. They were radical left-wing films, but they were genre films. Of course, they were exploring the major social issue of the time, which was the Depression.
Just what's out there now? 10 empty. Yeah, 10 empty cinemas. That's what. And working back from there. See why we don't get it. Look, why did people stop making westerns in the United States? Because people stopped going to westerns, and so for 25 years, okay, and then Clint makes Unforgiven. But the point is, why they stop making westerns? Well, because nobody went to see them. Why do we keep making social realist movies? Nobody goes to see them. We're too stupid.
Yeah. No, I think, you see, genre, that despised movie concept, it's a wonderful coat hanger upon which to hang social issues. But you have to give the audience the standard, tropes and structure that genre offers, and then weld your social issue, your political issue into it, so that it resonates with your audience. But what they come to see is not, is not the social issue or the political axe to grind. They're coming to be entertained. They want to, they want to have a male-female. Or a male-male, or a female-female, and they want to have a love. They want to have pegs and holes, kind of. That was a description that an American distributor gave to me. That they want to see a relationship develop in a film. They want to have excitement. They want to have laughs. They want to have gasps. They want to have shocks. And that's what the Nickelodeon gave. That's the birth of movies. That's what the Nickelodeon gave the public initially, and now it's become immensely sophisticated, and huge amounts of money can be spent on making a piece of filmed entertainment. But genre was never appreciated in this country as a wonderful structure within which you could sell a whole variety of ideas.
Thanks everyone on the panel, and thanks very much everyone for coming, and hope you enjoy the rest of the festival.
Thank you. Thank you.
I guess we should start with USC. And you were there during the golden period. You were there during...
Yeah, but we didn't know it, It was the fibro-cement period as far as we were concerned. It was a terrible old place, you know, but there were some good people there.
Maybe we should run through a few of the famous classmates you had there.
John Carpenter, I remember, he was a very funny kind of guy. Not as funny as me, but funny.
And were you on the set of Dark Star, which I guess he was making there at the time?
Dark Star was shot at USC. I mean, he did what Tim Burstall did here, which was, you know, they gave him the money to do a short, so he shot the first 3 scenes of a film, and then said, "No, I have to finish it," which is what Tim did with Stork.
George Lucas, who I understand was very prolific when he was there? George
was there. He left the semester I arrived. It wasn't anything I did, but he was very prolific, and it's kind of odd that he has become not so prolific since, you know, like he almost doesn't want to make films. And back then, he was the only person who would work with the Navy crews. The Navy had a lot of equipment and a lot of film stock. So George said, "I really like these Navy guys," and that way we couldn't figure out how come he was making films in colour, but you see the Navy gave him colour film. And he could shoot a lot of film, and he was always working.
And John Milius as well.
John Milius, I remember in a writing class, did a train smash, and I thought it was really good because he upended the table, and it was really an exciting train smash.
At that time, too, you invited back heroes of yours from past Hollywood, like John Ford and Hitchcock, to lecture.
In '67, we had Hitchcock down, and that was an interesting night, and I got to do what you're doing now, and he gave me a hard time. And then we had Ford down, and I said, "Look, I don't know enough about Ford's work to get up on stage. If I'd known more about Ford, I certainly wouldn't have got up on stage with him." And so we brought Peter Bogdanovich down to get up on stage with him, and Ford wouldn't have him on the stage. And well, there are more stories from that night. Among other things, he asked me whether they still had the painting in Young and Jackson's, and said he spent a lot of time in there during the war, pissed with MacArthur. Because we had other people down, Orson Welles and a lot of people. And this derelict came in and sat next to me, and I thought, this was at one of Arthur Knight's classes, and this guy comes in and sits next to me, looking less respectable than me now, and you know, in those days I was wearing a suit, you know. And in comes Arthur and introduces Sam Peckinpah, who gets up on stage, and it was this smelly guy next to me. So there you are.
You returned to Australia and you worked for the great talent Noddy Miller.
Yeah, we did about a dozen homicides together, I guess. I was his AD. It was kind of a toss-up. He knew the mailroom, and I'd been to film school, and they couldn't decide which of us to make a director. So they made him a director first, and then they made me a director, and then they fired me.
I think you directed 13 or so episodes?
13 or so.
I mentioned there was a pretty heavy formula involved. Did you try to do anything new?
You murdered someone in a car, and then they talked a lot, and then you did a car chase. That was how you did homicide, you know?
I've read, I haven't seen, but I've read that you introduced crazy dream sequences into homicide episodes, and that's part of the reason you got
fired. I did a scene with Norman Yem and his twin brother Gordon running naked down the first fairway at Victoria Golf Club, but I didn't think that was crazy. It wasn't the formula. I got into a bit of trouble. Hector called me fella a few times, and called me into his office and said, "Now, fella, what are you doing to the fabric of this show?" We had talked the crew into putting $10 of the $30 tea money, because you see the AD's job in those days was to go to a local milk bar, this was before latte, and buy tea and coffee for the crew. So we had $30 to do that for the week, and I persuaded them that if we put $10 of it towards a wheelchair, we could do dolly shots, because I heard they'd done that on Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. And so one week we did dolly shots, and Hector called me into his office and said, "You are undermining the fabric of this show. We've been making this show without dollies for years. What's your problem?" So I was soon got rid of.
We'll go straight to Esquimonel, which I think you originally tried to get funded in the States?
Yeah, I took it with me to the States in 1972, not realising that no one had ever heard of the poem Esquimonel. It's known in England and it's known in Canada, but it's not known in the States. And I wanted to do a kind of revisionist Western, so I did, on the goldfields.
I know that you're a big fan of Ford, and I know that you you decided to go and shoot from the hip on the set, and that is just go in there and ad-lib all your shots.
Yeah, I was trying to do a kind of improvisational comedy, but funnily enough, the basic notion that Dead-Eye Dick sees one thing and reality is another thing was really the basic idea of Psycho 2, which was that Norman would see his mother no matter who put on the wig.
During the shooting of Eskimo Now, word leaked out to the press that it was, you know, slightly bawdy and pornographic, and the Festival of Light...
Well, if they'd known the poem, they would have had some idea.
And because there'd been some government funding in it, the Festival of Light went on record as saying it was government-funded pornography.
I went on the Mike Walsh show and debated with Fred Nile, and I thought I won. But I think Fred won. I think he had more fans at the time. They were picketing the theatre, and I thought this was great publicity. But there is no publicity is good publicity is not true when it involves taxpayers' money. And when they were told that the government has wasted your money not only on this Jackson Pollock obscenity, but on filming Eskimo Nell, everyone boycotted the film and the painting for a while, I guess.
Do you think Eskimo Nell suffered because it came at sort of the tail end of the graffiti era of Australian films?
Do you mean the R certificate?
Yeah.
Or no, were we ahead of Alvin Purple? I can't remember. No. We were after Barry Mackenzie, and I think we were ahead of... No, we were after Alvin Purple, because Alan Hopgood was suggested to me as a writer on the strength of Alvin Purple. Maybe. I think we suffered because Fred Nile's campaign was successful. Either that or the film was bad. I've never been quite certain. But when you don't get people there in the first place, you can't create word of mouth.
Eskimo Nell came out, the cinemas were picketed. Obviously, something happened. The film didn't do very well at all.
Right, no one came.
No one came. It closed very quickly.
Yeah.
But in charge of, I think, selling the film overseas was a guy called Tony Ganane, who you met at that point.
That's correct, yes. Tony was around Melbourne University and had a huge knowledge not just of film, but memorised the names of companies from Variety and things like that. And he had a law degree, or almost, and suggested he knew how we could go about selling Eskimo Nell at the Cannes Film Festival, and that was, I think, the first year that we had a delegation to the festival. And yeah, so I met Tony, and Tony had this film called Tender Loving Nurses that he wanted to make. That was a good title in those days. I wanted to make that. And he had raised some money for it, $20,000, and we needed $30,000 to make Tender Loving Nurses. So he said, well, what could we make for $20,000? And I said, a documentary. He said, oh, okay. Could we make a documentary about sex? I said, yeah. They do it all the time in Scandinavia. So we explored massage parlours and learned quite quickly. We went in and Tony was in his suit and they thought he was the vice squad. So we raised quite a bit of money quite quickly that way. And, but what we discovered was that working girls don't really want to be seen on film. And so I said, well, some of my friends are making this stuff in the States. So I'll find out what it costs. Well, we found out John Holmes was $200 a day. And so we did our rough sums and we went over there and we shot for 10 days and we shot 10 women's fantasies. Tony and I were authorities on women's fantasies.
Suddenly Phantasm's opening and it's playing for a year at the Dendy and making, $1 million.
Yeah, Phantasm's how I got to make Patrick. Phantasm made sufficient money that they gave me the money to do Patrick.
You described Patrick as a middle course film, Richard.
What?
A middle course film aimed at the international market.
Yeah, I think what we were probably talking about was that everyone else was talking about cultural integrity, and I had none. Still don't. And I said, well, you know, but our audiences like the same films that other audiences like, so I want to make a mid-Pacific film. I want to make a film that's sort of set almost anywhere. And that was, as opposed to Eskimo Nell, which of course was set in Australia. So the opening of Patrick, which was a kind of Hitchcock homage, yeah, that's probably the right word. I would say it was a rip-off, but it wasn't, because Hitchcock never really did the occult. But we ripped it off to the extent that I found the house that looked the most like the Psycho house, and the logo, you know, we only used the name Patrick so it'd look like Psycho, and then we had a logo made up that looked like it. And Hollywood figured that out eventually, because they asked me to do Psycho 2.
And Patrick was a huge commercial success, possibly not here, but definitely overseas and at Cannes.
Patrick was the first film that really made big sales at Cannes. You know, we had people rushing at us with contracts in their hands. It was quite wonderful. And yes, we did very well, but incredibly, the moment the film broke even, everybody went out of business, and it didn't earn 1 cent more for any of the investors. And yet we were on the top 10 list in Variety and various other things. I don't know quite what happened. I should, but it's anyone's guess.
Now, what's amazing too is that when Patrick was released in the States, they redubbed it from English into American.
Yeah, we were not real pleased about that, especially not Sir Robert Helpman, who thought he sounded weird. And you know what's really funny is that when these actors are brought in to dub other actors, if the performance has any integrity at all, after a while they start doing the performance, and along with the performance comes the accents. So the absurdity is that the American dub of Patrick, they all sound like they're talking with English accents. They recut the film in a fairly horrible way, I think, and yeah, we actually had a playoff screening at one of the film festivals there or something, where we screened their version and we screened the original, and the American audience liked the original better.
And the film was so successful, I think it was the highest grossing film of all time in Italy, that it spawned...
Something like that.
It spawned, which is a first for any Australian film I know, an unofficial spaghetti sequel. Patrick is still alive.
Yes.
And Ganane, I think, flew DeRoche to Fiji when you were working on Blue Lagoon to write Patrick 2.
To write Patrick 2, yeah. Yeah, we had a good storyline for that. I don't know why it didn't happen. Probably the Italian sequel.
Why don't you give us a pitch for Patrick 2 quickly then?
What a guy. You think I know that? Jesus. I remember it was called The Man Who Wasn't There. And it had a scene before Lost Boys of Patrick flying around the rooftops with this girl. That's all I remember.
So DeRoche has flown over to work on Patrick 2 and you write Road Games.
That's right. And we didn't tell Tony, but neither did he pay us any profit from Patrick, so we were square.
Well, maybe we should talk a bit about Ganane, because he's a very colourful figure.
He was one of the better producers I've worked with. He was really good, really supportive. I liked Tony a lot. He had strange taste, but I could usually bend him to my even stranger taste. During the era of the 10BA tax deduction, he got very creative, and as a consequence, a lot of people got their fingers burned. But I wasn't here then, so as far as I'm concerned, Tony was a great guy.
He's one of those guys, I guess, who sort of used the Hollywood role model as a producer. He wore flashy suits, was always darting from city to city, smoked cigars.
Yeah, we called him Gucci, because he wore Gucci clobber, because it had G's all over it, and his name was Ganane. And he called himself Anthony I. Ganane, and that was after Roger O. Thornhill in North by Northwest, because when asked what the I stood for, he said nothing.
What I read, which is probably totally wrong, is it stood for international.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe he made that up later.
A film before Road Games were edited, and that was a film called Race for the Yankee Zephyr.
Yeah. Yeah, that was one that I developed with Everett, about off-road racing. You know, these things sound dated now, but they weren't then. and we came up with quite a good script set up on Cape York. We went up there and researched it and so on, and then I was in the middle of shooting Road Games, and Tony wanted to co-produce Yankee Zephyr with me, and then he went to New Zealand, and I said, but there aren't crocodiles in New Zealand. And he said, yeah, but there are glaciers. I said, but I don't want to make a film about glaciers. And so I gave him the rights, or sold him the rights to Yankee Zephyr, and they made it with, did David Hemmings direct it? Yeah. Changed it quite a lot.
Which I think the idea for Road Games came to be when you lent Everett de Roche's script to Rear Window during Patrick in a way to set the typing for the script.
Yes, I said to Everett, we've got a problem with our scripts because they don't time out to the right length. Can we format the script properly? And I had a collection of Hitchcock scripts that he'd given me, and I lent Everett Rear Window as a pro forma. It was a rather poor choice, actually, because Rear Window is about 160 pages long as a script, which is very long. But Everett read the script and said it'd be great to do Rear Window set in a truck. So we did.
In '81, when you started work on Road Games, Actors Equity ran into, as they say, the most insidious enemies they ever faced, which were you and Ganane.
I thought they were pretty insidious, you know.
And all involving international standing of actors being imported into the country.
Yeah, cultural exactitude, Jesus. I remember making a speech somewhere at one point about how we had fought at the Eureka Stockade to have the right to drive on the left side of the road, because we were told we weren't allowed to make Road Games because we'd have the truck on the wrong side of the road. I don't know what that was about, but and then they told me that that Bernard Schwartz was in fact Tony Curtis, and the reason we had used Jamie Lee Curtis was because Bernard Schwartz, who is Bernard Schwartz, not Tony Curtis, was in fact Jamie's father, and indeed, well, I then said, well, apparently Equity get their information from fantail wrappers. I was going to use a local actress named Lisa Peers to play the Jamie Lee Curtis part, and Avco, who were giving us $500,000 US, said, oh, we don't think Stacey Keach is strong enough on his own. This is standard distributor stuff, you know. Once you get one person, they want another, and another, and another, and another. And I said, can you get another American in there, you know, blah, blah, blah. Well, I was visiting John Carpenter, and he introduced me to Jamie, and I thought, well, that'd be an interesting idea, mostly because she was, no, I guess I'd seen Halloween, but mostly because she was Janet Leigh's daughter. I thought that was kind of cute, you know. So, I mean, promotable is what I thought, and so did Bob Ramey. So, so we brought her in, but it didn't sit well.
Jamie Lee Curtis was reduced to tears at a party because actors went up to her and said, why are you stealing our jobs away from us?
No, I think that was the Sydney Film Festival. We released her to go to a premiere of The Fog at the Sydney Film Festival, and when she got there, they gave her a hard time. And she came back to the desert in tears, so she'd been crying for quite a while.
It wasn't an easy shoot. You had massive problems with crews, with unions.
It wasn't an easy shoot. No, this was the era when the Brits came out here and decided to tell us how to make films, and they talked about tea breaks. These were the people who, you know, had come to Australia because the tea break had already vanished in England, and they thought they'd re-implement it here. So they were tea drinkers as opposed to real filmmakers. And it didn't lead to very good interchanges on the set. We would have to bargain to do shots and things, you know, and gee, Stacey and Jamie had finally had about enough of it, you know. They're trying to do takes and the lights would go off in the middle of a take because it's a tea break. You know, really, the camera would be rolling and lights would go appalling stuff.
And the final chase, which is, I guess, the last third of the film, you'd scheduled a week and it ended up being shot in a day and a half?
I remember it was severely compromised, the final sequence of the sort of slow chase, which Everett had tried to sell to Crawfords and couldn't. The idea that they would go slower and slower because the truck was being taken into narrower and narrower streets and alleyways and the like. He was told that it'd never work at Crawford, so we figured we better do it. And we did, but we had a much more elaborate scene planned, and it was the first film on which film financiers, who are the major completion guarantor, worked in Australia, and they would send us these intimidating, well, they weren't faxes in that era, I can't remember what they were, but "we are shocked and amazed," they would always begin. And so the plug was pulled on us on the last night of shooting, when we wouldn't have even gone over budget if we'd shot the extra 2 or 3 days, and we had this fantastic stunt worked out where Marion Edward was a pillion passenger on Sneezy Rider's motorbike, Sneezy Rider being Patrick, Robert Thompson, and they went under the, you know, every character from the film had a stunt with the truck in this final chase, but they all got cut because of these shocked and amazed faxes. And I met the guy who was sending them a couple of years later. He's been completion guarantor on every film I've ever done, and he said, "Oh, that was just standard procedure. You weren't really supposed to stop. We were amazed when you did." I didn't want to stop. That was just to try to scare you into not going too over budget.
Road Games gets completed, unanimously good reviews, and but you're crucified by the press.
So somebody suggested that Everett named the Stacey Keach character in this film Patrick Quid because of the amount of money we'd made out of Patrick. No, I guess he did. It was secret to me, but this is what Donald Spoto and those people do, you know. They find things in there that are not there. And sometimes they don't find things that are.
I think they also, the press was saying that it was a film written by an American who wanted to be an Australian, and directed by an Australian who wanted to be an American.
Directed by a would-be American.
Right.
I was called, yeah.
And subsequently, you found it very hard.
No, I left straight away. I headed straight for LA. I still had friends there. I went to the States on spec, and when I got there, I got offered Psycho 2. Yeah, they said, "Can you direct this film? Can you direct the film in the Hitchcockian style?" And I said, "Well, take a look at Patrick." And they saw the logo and said, "Yeah, that looks like he knows."